Perfect. Okay, so why are we here today? Well, some of you will know that we've been talking about the urgency of the unfolding climate crisis for a while now, and Fairtrade Fortnight is the opportunity that we have every year to spend 2 weeks bringing the most urgent issues on trade and climate to the forefront of the public consciousness of consumers, businesses, and politicians. And you might ask why the climate crisis is relevant to Fairtrade, an organisation that has traditionally focused on income and trade for farmers. And well, there's really 2 reasons for that. The first is that while farmers and workers continue to earn low incomes, it means it's really hard for them to be able to tackle the challenges they're already facing because of the changing climate. So they need to adapt the way that they work and farm now. They're already dealing with the consequences of irregular weather patterns, whether that's flooding, disease, too much heat, poor soil, and all of the adaptation to those costs money. It also means that many of them are seeing their crops dying out or seeing land that they were able to farm on no longer able to be used. And we know that if things don't change fast, we're looking at a very damaging future for farmers and workers in the next sort of 25 years. So farmers really simply have to be paid more to be able to survive this. Being part of Fairtrade supports them with that adaptation. It supports them with higher incomes, and it connects them to training and a network of other farmers to learn from. But many of them still don't sell enough of their commodity or enough of their crops on Fairtrade terms. But the second thing, is Fairtrade the answer on its own? Well, no, of course it's not. It's not the total answer. We have to change the way we live as humans, and there's a role for everyone in that, whether you're a consumer choosing what you buy, whether you're a business choosing how you source what you sell, managing your carbon footprint, or whether you're a politician that's developing climate funds, putting forward regulation for climate mitigation and developing new trade policies. So these are some of the things we're going to talk about today. We know it's not an easy time to have this conversation. We're all in the middle of a cost of living crisis that's being driven by so many factors. But we also know that where people are able to make a difference, they can and will make a choice to stand with farmers and workers worldwide to protect the food we love and the crops that we rely on from extinction. So it's my absolute pleasure today to be joined by 2 really great speakers that we're going to be chatting to. So the first is Ines Zairi, and Ines is a production and location manager for a hired labour organisation called Desert Joy, and they grow Fairtrade tomatoes as well as other vegetables in Tunisia. And Ines also has a seat on the board of Fairtrade Africa, which is one of the global producer networks that the Fairtrade Foundation in the UK works with. Very topical conversation, tomatoes right now, so we're delighted to have Ines here. I think it's the first time we've had a tomato grower here talking to us for Fairtrade Fortnight. And then the other person we're joined by, who many of you will have met before, is Tim Aldred, who is the head of policy at the Fairtrade Foundation. And both Ines and Tim attended COP27, the UN climate conference at the end of last year, to push political leaders to deliver more on climate justice. So, probably heard enough from me. I'm going to actually pass over now to both Tim and Ines to just introduce themselves. So Ines, do you want to go first and just tell everybody a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Sarah. So hello, pleasure to see you all and delighted to be with you today. I'm Ines Zairi. I'm from Tunisia. I'm a location production grower in Desert Joy, Tunisia. And we are producing tomatoes, cherry tomato. Our company is certified Fairtrade since 2015, and we are winner of the climate change awards and most support of hired labor. And I participate myself in the last edition of COP together with Tim to be the voice of the producer and farmer. And as I said, as a board member in the Fairtrade Africa, so it was a good opportunity to raise the voice of all the farmers that I represent by myself in the COP. Nice to see you all today. Thank you.
Lovely, and so great to have you here with us, Ines. Thank you so much for being here on the weekend. And Tim, do you want to introduce yourself for those that haven't met you before?
Hello, I'm Tim Aldred and I'm head of policy at the Fairtrade Foundation, which sounds a lot grander than it is because there's only 1.8 of us in the policy team. But it's a real privilege to work for Fairtrade here in the UK. And I was just seeing people coming in literally from one end of the country to the other. And it's such a joy to be sort of supported by such a great group of supporters around the country. It's actually my 10th year at Fairtrade. I've passed my 10-year anniversary, and I suppose I would feel it's a real privilege to have had that opportunity and seen so much change in Fairtrade over that time. Lovely to be here with Ines. Ines, really lovely to be on the panel with you and to have had that time together with you and other Fairtrade colleagues at COP27. And before we get into the bigger conversation, perhaps it's worth saying that those of you in Scotland particularly will remember COP26 in Glasgow and how the Fairtrade Foundation was in a sense the host of for the Fairtrade movement as that conference happened. This time COP was in Africa, was in Egypt, and Fairtrade Africa with board members such as Ines were hosting us from around the world as we sought to see what we could do within the context of that conference. So it's great to be part of such a global movement. And I hope perhaps maybe what I can do today is maybe step back a little bit and talk about some of the bigger picture issues that are affecting us when we talk about fair trade and climate. Thank you, Sarah.
Perfect, thanks, Tim. I just passed my 10th year at Fairtrade as well, so you got the old stalwarts of Fairtrade Foundation with you today. So Tim and I both started here around the same time, and I echo your sentiments about the opportunities we've had over that time. It's a real privilege. Okay, so we're going to kick off with some questions because this is about what you guys wanted to hear about, and we asked you before we kicked off this event what you would like to hear about, talking to Tim and Ines. So we pulled some of the questions that you guys sent in advance, but in the meantime, do feel free to drop any questions that you think of during the initial bit where we share the questions we've had in advance. If there's anything you think of you'd like to ask Tim or Ines, do pop them in the chat. So I think the first thing that we want to ask really is that this is the first time we've had a Fairtrade tomato farmer with us. So I think it's probably something that campaigners haven't heard so much about, Ines. So do you want to just tell us a little bit what tomato farming looks like in Tunisia?
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for the questions. So we are a Fairtrade grower in the south of Tunisia. So we are located just in the south, in front of the sea, let's say, but in the door of the desert. So that's why the name is Desert Joy. So like the joy of the desert. So the location is very special, creating a climate that is a bit hot in the summer and very dry. This just to speak about the climate bit of our location. So speaking about growing tomato in Tunisia, yeah, we grow tomato under greenhouses. So we try to mitigate to the maximum the climate change and crisis. So I will maybe speak about how much we cover. Now we have 40 hectares under greenhouses. We produce cherry tomato, and our company is a Dutch Tunisian company, and we started our business in 2012. So for us now we have 1,000 employees, and 80% for them is women. So the Dutch partner come to invest in Tunisia because of the sun, mainly because Tunisia, the south, let's say the south of Tunisia is well known by the lights and sun and the long days, and so this is so we not use artificial light to grow tomato. This is first, and there is a lot of another reason. The availability of labor, the availability of gas line, it's nearby. So we use the gas line for the production. And for the heat, we pump the water from the well, so well in the ground. And the location that we are located in is well known by the hot water from the ground. So this water is used to heat the greenhouses. So we try to optimize all these factors that I named, the energy use, the water from the ground, the gas line, the labor, and everything, to produce a very tasty tomato. It was the first tomato in the world certified Fairtrade, high labor. So, then we opened the door to other company to be certified producing tomatoes.
Amazing. I just think it's amazing that we've got you here today when tomatoes have been so topical in the UK. So we'll come on to that in a bit, but really great to hear about that, because it's such a different conversation to the ones that we've had quite a lot around cocoa and coffee, etc. So thank you so much for filling us in. So obviously, as I said, this event is quite timely, as people in the UK have been hearing a lot recently about the shortage of tomatoes. So I wondered if you could just share with people what you think is causing that. What are the main challenges for farmers right now, and what do you think needs to happen to tackle those?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for the question. I think for farming tomato, the main problem is the cost of fertilizer first. The inflation of cost is horrible, fertilizer, and of course the water scarcity. We cannot forget about it. The water scarcity is very horrible. And for example, here in Tunisia, we have a big problem now. We face that the water is not anymore, let's say, for example, for the investor is a big problem to think if they invest more or to extend more to dig more wells, because even the government will not give the authorization for that because of the scarcity. The climate change makes it worse. So you know that the world is more warmer now. The planet is more warmer by 3 degrees. So this make, let's say, the small farmers struggling to adopt the climate to the production, not only for the tomato but all the vegetables and fruits. And of course, this make the government struggling faced to the economic situation, inflation, of course, economic crisis, and when it's fragile economic, it's hard to for the farmers to boost. So the farmers need more support, let's say, from its funds or from the private sector and from the legislation to boost more and mobilize the resources to support on the climate crisis. This is, I think, the main now concern of the farmers.
Yeah, it's a really, really challenging time at the moment.
Yeah. This is, it was very challenging, and we see that I see that in all the corners of, let's say, of Africa. So, and yeah, if I see that from the Fairtrade tomato growers or vegetable growers, it's more about the water scarcity. So the water scarcity and the costs. So this is the main, and of course, we not forget the climate change.
And just quickly before we move on, in terms of fair trade benefits, what is that doing, and how is it helping with those challenges?
Yeah, so Fairtrade, it's a leader in social justice, let's say. So Fairtrade provide us with much needed guidance and the necessary mindset to deliver a new approach to building a fairer future. So for us, being a Fairtrade partner means joining a growing community to build a better and fairer world. And for me, as a board member of Fairtrade Africa, I feel that we, as a producer and farmers and workers, we are at the heart of decision making. We can fuel change and make the difference. So with Fairtrade, we are keen to and willing to make the change and to boost the change. Yeah,
it's really interesting, and I know that one of the big conversations that we've been having over time, over the last couple of years when we've been talking about climate, is the role of farmers and workers themselves in having a say in how we tackle some of these issues. And it's really important that those decisions are being taken by yourselves and that you're part of that conversation. So on that, I just want to move us on to your role in COP27, both of you, last year. So you were both there in Egypt last year. You went as part of the delegation that travelled with Fairtrade. It would be really good to hear your thoughts on and reflections on the conversation. So Tim, do you want to start with some of your thoughts on what you saw and what you heard at COP and what the challenges or opportunities there might be there?
Yes, well, I mean, as I said in my introduction, I think I'm really proud to be at Fairtrade, and we've seen a lot of changes over 10 years. And a lot of those have been positive because we've seen lots of companies take Fairtrade and ethics a lot more seriously than they ever used to and be more sophisticated. But I think we've also seen the challenges getting a lot bigger. And everyone around this room will know what they are. We've had this very difficult political period, lots of confrontational politics that's made it quite hard to take decisions in some areas. The cost of living crisis is, asking us the question, where is all the money going to come from for the changes we need to make? But I think the climate really is, it's now very, very clear to us, just how desperate a situation we are in, and we can see it right around the world affecting Fairtrade farmers. There was a study which was done by our colleagues at Fairtrade International in collaboration with some European universities, and they found that every single Fairtrade farmer around the world is facing changes in the weather over the next 5, 10, 20 years, which are going to make it harder for them to grow food. And it's no surprise because, this year we passed a really unhelpful, scary milestone. The last time that there was this much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was around 4 million years ago. So the last time we had this much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is 4 million years ago. And at the polar regions, there were actually forests. So, it's no surprise that, this is the situation we're in. And I think, it's a worrying situation all around. But one of the places where it really comes home to us is around our food, because it's so critical that we're able to grow our food and that we're able to get food that's affordable and nutritious for everybody who needs it. So that challenge is getting much harder. And I think my sense is that Fairtrade farmers are almost like Ines, I hope this doesn't sound so disrespectful, but almost like a canary in the coal mine. Because if we can see this happening to Fairtrade farmers, we know that it's happening to farmers everywhere. So I suppose that's the bad news, but I suppose the good news from our point of view is that, Fairtrade farmers clearly have solutions, ideas, proposals that will really help, but they need to be supported. And in particular, that kind of investment and support needs to get to them on the ground. And that's exactly the kind of decision and conversation that is happening at COP27. And that's, I think, why it's felt very important that Fairtrade is there and trying to get the voice of farmers across. I suppose my reflection, the reflection of the group from this last COP is mixed, is very mixed. I suppose you can see some good things. You can say, well, we made a decision on loss and damage. So there was an agreement that there should be funds committed to pay for countries where things had been actually damaged and where there was going to need to be funds to help people with that position. We saw a small agreement on agriculture, which was great to see. That there was some more serious attention being paid to agriculture. But I think for me, it's still the big picture questions where that process is letting us down. So it's still the commitment to reduce emissions is still stuck, is still not going fast enough. And then it's the money, it's all about the money. So again and again, it's, you hear pledges of finance, but I've yet to follow a COP process and see that all the money that has been promised has been delivered. So there is a failure to deliver on those two big issues. If we don't get progress on those, we will not move forward. But that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of things we can do. We can continue to press, and everything we do makes things better than it would be if we don't do them. But there is still a big political challenge. So so that's my download onto COP27.
Amazing, thank you, Tim. Very comprehensive, and really some big calls to action for the government still, who haven't really gone far enough to make the change that's needed. Not just the UK governments, around the world. Ines, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that in terms of what you saw while you were at COP, or your thoughts or feelings of the conversation as someone who's out there dealing with the consequences of climate change now. Yeah,
for me as well, Sarah, it was a bit mixed, because for me it was a good opportunity to be for the first time in COP, to see all, let's say, the key intervenant on the system and on the supply chain, government, ONG, and more to discuss and many side events. But for me, the climate justice is equitable and fair. So we need to think about the future, and it's not just COP and then we not see the decision implemented. Because even if we do side event and we discuss and we not see the decision and the reform on the government's policy, let's say in the private sector and the public sector, it's like we do nothing. So for me, I think that we need the private sector to change their process and integrate sustainable energy into their supply chain, and for the decision makers to promote appropriate legislation and legal framework as well to support farmers in achieving climate resilience. And of course, the media and the press and all that to raise the awareness of sustainable supply chain among the general public and urge consumers to be part of the change. So all that is very important to change. It's not only let's say the action need to be real. So this is my perspective.
Yeah, so important, and actually a really great segue into the next question that I was going to ask, which is at you, Tim, which has come in, which is thinking about all of that, your perspective on COP and all the really important stuff that Ines just said about, that there are people that need to take responsibility, people that need to raise awareness. We've done a few different things with campaigners recently on climate, but it would be really interesting to hear your perspective as the head of policy on why civil society has power, what is the role that they can play in this, and what's the role of fair trade campaigners in supporting some of the changes that are needed that we've just talked about.
So it is absolutely critical. I think, from time to time we will organise an event in Parliament together with, there's a very good sort of committed group of members of Parliament from across all the parties actually, who want to support us. And when we run an event, we quite often get very good attendance. And usually it's, I would say 2/3 of the MPs will say to us at a meeting like that, well, I'm here because there's a fair trade group in my constituency, and if I didn't come, they would really be cross with me. So we know that they are paying attention. I think increasingly actually politicians sort of pay attention to what their constituents are asking them for in real time. So really watching well, who's emailing me, who's writing letters to me, and what are they writing to me about? And it's really informing what they will care about and speak about. So it really matters. It's been a really tough 4 or 5 years to get the fair trade message across, I would say. The politics of Brexit, for whatever your view on that, this has really dominated what politicians have been talking about, and then obviously it's been quite unstable in our politics with several prime ministers coming through. And this is not to sort of comment on the rights or wrongs of any of that, but that's really, I think, pushed attention away from some of the big issues like climate change, which are so important. Politicians will only care about the things that they think their constituents care about. So we can see that made a difference, particularly in the run-up to Glasgow. We had some very good conversations with Alex Sharma, who was the minister responsible for COP26. We were able to get the chair of Fairtrade Africa to meet with Alex Sharma in the run-up to COP26 and really get the voice across. So we know that we can get there, but it is a long road. I mean, I sometimes it makes me frustrated, but then actually I was reflecting a year or so ago, actually reflecting on the progress of the slavery movement in the 1800s, the 1700s and the 1800s. The slavery movement was a 30, 40, 50-year exercise. The number of petitions that went into Parliament were multiple every single year. Some of these big things will not change unless we push on them through our lives, through in a generational sense. And it does make a difference. It does matter. It does. But it can feel frustrating to keep going, but it really does work over the long term if we're committed and we stick with it.
Brilliant, that's so helpful. And I can see, I'm just keeping a little bit of an eye on the chat and trying not to get distracted by it, but I can see people talking about the BBC pulling the episode, which is in the news at the moment, about pulling the David Attenborough episode for fear of upsetting politicians. But I think the message that Tim is sending, whether it's about that or whether it's about the lack of policy on climate change, whether it's the support for fair trade in your local area, that you play a massive role in speaking up about that. And actually, if you speak to your local policymakers about it, they will listen. And that is something that we are hearing when we have those background meetings with policymakers. We're hearing about how they listen to what it is that you tell them in your constituency. So it's really critical.
There's something else, Sarah, which I think is, perhaps this is a little bit cheeky of me to say this, but we are only maybe 2 years, 18 months away from an election. So at this point in time, we don't know who the new government is going to be, but that means it's a good time to talk not just to the politicians who we have at the moment, but to all the candidates that are planning to stand for Parliament in the future, and to be asking them, well, what are you going to do about this? Because we don't know who the government's going to be. It may change, it may not change. But either way, it's really good that the people who want our vote know what we think and and hear from us directly.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to move to some of the questions in the chat in just a second. But before I do that, I want to throw a bit of a big question at both of you, because it's one that came up a couple of times when we said that we were going to run this event. And I think it's the big question of global versus local. So we are talking about tomatoes today. And obviously we can grow tomatoes in the UK, unlike many of the other commodities that we talk about, coffee, cocoa, that aren't able to be grown here. And so one of the questions is, is it appropriate to be importing fair trade tomatoes from Africa? Shouldn't we be encouraging people to eat UK grown tomatoes in season? And so I wanted to just throw that one at both of you, because I know you both have thoughts on this. So Ines, do you want to start about the the topic of tomatoes from Africa versus tomatoes in the UK.
Okay. Okay, for just maybe I would say where our tomato you can find it in Europe, because we sent all our tomato to Netherlands, and through Netherlands it go to England and to all the country in Europe. So first, to encourage the people to eat the tomato from Africa, or the perspective of local vs global, I just want to mention that tomato grown in Tunisia, in Tunisian greenhouse, is generating lower 60% CO2 emission than Dutch greenhouse. So I think with that huge difference, we can understand how, let's say, the difference is huge between the footprint. Of course, the production and growing tomato need a lot of sun, as I already told in the beginning, and this that's why the tomato from Tunisia is with the taste of sun, and the taste is very nice. And of course, the growing tomato with a certified company, you know, when you are a consumer and you get to the market and you get the tomato from there, and you know the story behind how this premium from Fairtrade will improve the livelihood of the workers there, and how it will improve and support the farmers to not only to continue farming, but of course to face and to limit the climate crisis, and to face, let's say, all the challenges that they get from the crisis of change. So not only environment aspect, but as well social aspect, how we do to improve the social and the livelihood, to create and empower the workers and the communities, and to produce the tomato or the vegetable with the hands that they can see their children in a kindergarten, and they have transport, and they have fair wages, and they choose their work. So all the human rights aspect. So this is, I think, a bit the aspect of growing tomato in a certified Fairtrade company vs to found it in other let's say from another country or on UK.
That's so interesting, Ines, and I think a lot of the time when we talk about the impact of our global food system, we talk a lot about air miles and how far things fly and the carbon emissions that come from that, but we often don't think about when things are grown here. A lot of the time, even if we can grow them here, there is hot housing in greenhouses, etc., and all of that uses energy. So there are multiple things playing into this issue of increasing our carbon emissions. So it's really interesting to hear how you are working with companies that are, you know, using 60% less energy when they're hot housing their vegetables. So it's a really interesting one to think about.
Yeah, Sarah, just I want to mention in a few words what we are doing just for that. For us, we are thinking to reach the net zero carbon, because we are creating forests. So only we need of course, the authorization of the authorities, you know, but the creation of forests is now our concern to reach the net zero carbon first. And for the water, we do a lot to mitigate the, let's say, for the scarcity. So we are recycling the waste of water, and we re-inject it in the irrigation system to minimize to the maximum the water use. So the optimization of the water, and of course the optimization of the energy by the solar panels. Then we can use the solar panels for the energy and electricity. I already told about the footprint and the creation of the forest. So a lot of actions that we already start with, and we are willing to continue on this ride and on this way. Yeah.
And I think it just comes back to the conversation we've been having about how important it is that you guys play a role in this, because you're already doing that work out there. Like, you're already making the change that's needed, and it's right that you have a say in this and that you play a role in it and that you help to guide how we solve the problems we have with the climate at the moment. So really interesting. Tim, I'm just going to pass over to you, because I know that you have some thoughts on this as well, in terms of, you know, local versus global and that debate.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would be nice, wouldn't it, if there were simple answers on this one, but it's we are in a place where we have a difficult, quite a complex challenge before us. I think there are a few things that can guide us through. Like, you know, I think for some people, they will feel that it's right for them and something that they can do, that they can simply grow seasonal vegetables, not grown with heated greenhouses, locally sourced, and some people will be able to stick with that and that's fantastic, because that will, you know, that would really bring the carbon footprint of food right down. A lot of people can't do that, you know, maybe because of price, or because of you know, they need nutrition, or, you know, for their family, and you know, it's too expensive and difficult to do that, you know, in another way. So we do have a complicated challenge, and we can't just sort of say, well, let's just buy everything locally and be done with it. So how do we pick our way through? I think to look seriously at the carbon footprint and the environmental footprint. I think that's what I'm hearing from Ines. It's not a question about how far has something come. It's a question about how much carbon has it consumed, how much environmental impact has it has. And then if you start there, then you can say both to companies, or what are you doing to support producers in reducing that carbon footprint, both from the transport and from and within production. And I think you also need to ask the question, who is profiting? I think we quite often say, well, we'd like to deal with, you know, have more environmentally friendly products, but the consumer is going to have to pay more, aren't they, if that is the case? Actually, we still have a good number of our big retailers who earn very, very healthy profits, and are still, you know, doing very well from a stock market point of view. And I think we do have to push that question back a bit and say, well, actually, is the balance right? You know, is as much investment coming in towards the production, towards strategies to really get towards net zero, to bring emissions down as could be? So I think that's a question for our businesses. And then for our government, we frankly have to say, what are you doing? If we look at the trade deals that are coming through, in our team, we looked quite closely at the carbon impact of 3 of the big deals, you know, India, Australia, I think there was another one that we looked at, which escapes me. And we looked at the government's own predictions for what that would do to carbon emissions. Every single one predicted that carbon emissions would rise. And these are the government's own figures. So I think we do have to say to our politicians, what are you doing? Why are you not giving us policy that really helps us as people working with farmers deliver the improvements we need? Why are you not helping British farmers more, frankly? And also, why are you not supporting the businesses that want to do the right thing more effectively? Because the solutions, I think, are there, but it does need a policy environment that's going to support it.
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button there. That was really great. Thank you, Tim. And yeah, so many challenges, and let's hope that we can make them listen over time. It can feel a bit like bashing your head against a brick wall at the moment, but this is why, you know, the role that you guys can play in continuing to push those messages with your local politicians, which then feed into the changes that happen above them, is really, really crucial. So we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to be able to move over to some of the live questions we've had while you guys have been talking. So I'm going to start with one from Christine Ines, which hopefully you might be able to help with. So Christine's asking that she's spoken to someone from Kenya recently who hadn't actually heard of Fairtrade. And so her question is, how do producers and farmers become a part of the Fairtrade system? So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you came to be part of Fairtrade.
Reading, yeah, Sarah, I'm just reading the question of Christine. She had worked for Oxfam in various parts of Africa, but had never heard of Fairtrade. Yeah, this is a good question. Yeah, the awareness to Fairtrade, because this really, for example, here in Tunisia, someone not even know what is Fairtrade or the label of Fairtrade. Of course, we not have in our markets Fairtrade, let's say Fairtrade products, but they never know about it. So this is, I think, this can the role of the Fairtrade Foundation and Fairtrade International and Africa to sensibilize and aware about the Fairtrade. I see many campaigns that they are doing well about that, but for Kenyan, I think Fairtrade Africa there, it's in Kenya, based in Kenya. So cacao and tea farmers there, they are aware, but this is a bit strange that they not know about it. But to aware, to have the Fairtrade accreditation is quite procedure that they have to go through, and just to start the procedure and get involved in the system. So as I said, awareness and then get involved in the system.
Yeah. Thank you. And Christine, do send an email to us as well if there's a particular person that's asking about that, and we can put them in touch with our supply chain team, who will be able to support if there are people wanting to become part of the Fairtrade system that currently aren't. We can take them through the process that producers need to go through to be part of that, because part of Fairtrade is about supporting producers to become part of that system if they want to be. So another big question, which I'm not surprised has come up, and I'm going to sort of fire it at you, Tim, if that's okay, is the topic of tradecraft. So really sad news coming out of tradecraft over the last couple of months, and something that I know will be felt really hard by many of our really long-term supporters who have spent many years stocking and selling tradecraft goods in their local churches, local market stores, etc. So do you want to just reflect quickly on what this means for Fairtrade in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely devastating. I mean, as you might imagine, we work very closely with the tradecraft team and also the team over at Transform Trade, formerly Tradecraft Exchange, and, you know, had really, you know, sort of agonized with them as they'd gone through the challenges of the last few years, and really sad that you know, they felt they couldn't make it work. I think, you know, and like many of you, you know, I have a you know, there's a Fairtrade group at our local church, and we have a stall, and a long relationship with Tradecraft, which goes back a really long way. So so I think, you know, what has happened so behind the scenes, if you like, is that there's a sort of group of the businesses that are very Fairtrade focused, if you like. They really only do Fairtrade supplies, which would include people like Cafe Direct and Divine and the names that you'll be familiar with. And, you know, they've been speaking together and with us and with Transform Trade to say, well, what do we do now? And they're really committed to say, well, you know, can we find other ways to help, you know, make sure that those supplies continue. Transform Trade is working really hard to support producers that were selling into tradecraft. So I think we do have a joint statement that came out relatively recently, Sarah, and I wonder if we might actually put that in the chat, which is, you know, that would say better than me, you know, the specific details about what's happening right at this point in time. But I think, you know, we are so trying to do our very best to find ways for people with Fairtrade stalls to keep them well stocked and well supported. And Transform Trade isn't going anywhere. They're really, you know, on the case. They will be doing their big brews and sort of Transform Trade campaign activities, just as ever was the case. So I think, you know, that's one important thing to say, that although Tradecraft, the company, has run into difficulties, Transform Trade is very much still with us and very much working in partnership with us. I don't know what's happening to the Tradecraft stock as well. Actually, that might be on the statement, and it would be a question that could be would be answered by others probably.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. And yeah, really sad times, but others that remain are really committed to carrying on the work that Tradecraft have done and supporting Transform Trade as we move forward. So a really important question, and, you know, one to keep asking about what the future holds. So, and why we need you guys more than ever to ensure that Fairtrade thrives. Just quickly as well, I can see people asking, you know, why there's a couple of questions around not seeing Fairtrade Fortnight in the co-op and not being able to find things in the supermarkets. So I think really quickly on this one, rather than passing over, is just to say that do go into your, someone else put in the chat, do go into your local co-op. If you can't see anything about Fairtrade Fortnight or Fairtrade, do go in and ask why it's not in there. Co-op are a huge partner of ours, very dedicated in their Fairtrade support. So do go in and ask the manager, you know, where's your Fairtrade Fortnight stuff in store this year. But on the topic of less Fairtrade in shops or less visibility, I think the reality is it just has changed. So Fairtrade has had to evolve over the years in terms of what it looks like in stores. So you may see less branded goods with sort of the Fairtrade mark on the front, as you might have done 20 years ago, but it's not a sign that there's less commitment to Fairtrade. So in many cases, big retailers are stocking more Fairtrade than ever, you know, and actually it's getting more affordable as well. So people like Aldi and Lidl are really increasing their Fairtrade commitments. And it might not always have the Fairtrade mark on the front of the pack, but they are buying on Fairtrade terms. So the same support is going back to those producers. So there's not a shrinking, particularly in the marketplace of Fairtrade. It's still very much in support out there. And if you can't find Fairtrade in a particular supermarket that you are shopping in, do ask where you can find it, and do also let us know. We're always keen to hear if you're not seeing Fairtrade on the shelves. Let us know where you're shopping and we will look into it from our side as well.
I would add something as well, Sarah, which is, I think, you know, so from our sort of position as Fairtrade dinosaurs of 10 years standing, now if I look back over 10 years, I think companies have become more sophisticated. You know, they're putting more money into their own thinking and resourcing about ethical sourcing and so on. And that's really good, but it gives us a slightly different problem to work with. It actually demands that as campaigners, as activists, we ourselves become more sophisticated, because the job that we now have to do is to say, well, is this big statement that's coming from a company about their ethics, is this a really good commitment, or is it really good public relations? And it is often very hard to tell the difference. And so, you know, we spend quite a lot of time trying to tell the difference ourselves. But I think the big opportunity that is there for members of the public, shoppers, is to ask the question, what does this actually mean? What actually does this mean, this statement that you've made, and is it true? And does it match up to what would be happening if it was fair trade? And there's no, that kind of cuts through the complexity.
Yeah, that's great. Right, we're getting really close to the end of this. It's been such a great conversation, both of you. Thank you so much. And I want to have the opportunity to pass back to Ines for a final message to campaigners. But just before I do that, I can see in the chat, Tim, that someone is asking whether you've ever considered being a politician. I wonder if you'd perhaps like to comment on that before we wrap up.
I don't think that's the career for me.
Okay, a campaigner through and through, not looking to step over the line, unfortunately, guys, this time. So we'll keep trying to convince him. Okay, so we're nearing the end. Guys, it's been so great to talk to both of you, and thank you so much to everyone that's been here today, joining, sharing your questions. If there's anything we didn't get to answer today, we will try and follow up with it as part of our emails out to all of you guys as campaigners. But I can see you've all been chatting with each other and helping each other to understand where you might buy stuff, etc. So really great to see the chat just going on between all of you. But before I wrap up and finish today, I want to just pass back to Ines and just say, is there any final message, Ines, that you would like to give to campaigners as we near the end of Fairtrade Fortnight this year?
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Tim. Thank you for all the audience today, and delighted to see the conversation between them all. So for me, it was a pleasure today to share my perspective with you all. My final message will be that without fair trade, we cannot boost the change for farmers. Whatever your budget and whenever you shop, consumer can choose fair trade product today to support farmers by ensuring they have fair pay to face the climate crisis and to continue producing the food we love all. Thank you all for your presence.
Thanks, Ines, and thank you so much for joining us today on your weekend. It's been so good to have you here. So interesting to hear what it's like to farm tomatoes as well. This is a new one for us, so it's been really great to hear from you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Being here, sharing your thoughts, and thank you to everyone that came today for giving up your Saturday to hear this conversation. We're so grateful to have you. And although it's the end of Fairtrade Fortnight, it's not the end of the fight. So we will be in touch after Fairtrade Fortnight about how we take all of these conversations forward. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your weekends. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.